Ireland have lost Sexton. I'm a massive fan of Jack Crowley, but Marseille away is a tough place to say, go and dominate this game. So I think it'll be quite close, but I would have France crossing the line. And if they win that one, they become odds-on favourites for the Grand Slam immediately.
Welcome. We did the Rugby World Cup together. It's now Six Nations time here on Times Radio. Stuart Barnes is the former Bath and England fly half expert on rugby, writes beautifully about it for the Times. We had a lovely time talking about the World Cup. What a World Cup that was. Maybe if you weren't Irish or English or Scottish or Welsh or Italian, actually, for that matter, but or French. I mean, they put it on very well, but they didn't get over the line in the end. What's going to happen in this Six Nations? We're going to talk things over, and then every week we're going to review the action. Six Nations is starting this week, so Stuart Barnes is with me now. Stuart, great to see you.
It's a pleasure, Steve.
Shall we go through the teams? I want to talk about England at some point because I want to talk a bit about how the state of English rugby, the problems of the domestic game and how that might impact on the national team. But I thought we could go through the teams quickly of the Six Nations. Do you want to start, and let's do it in the order that you think they might finish? So okay. If we go from the favourite down to Italy, if we're brutally honest.
How do you know? How do you read my mind?
Shall we start then? Who are you going to start with? Is it Ireland? Is it Ireland who are the world number one? They've had some changes. They've got a tricky game against France. Are Ireland your favourites?
No, France are.
Okay.
I think the Six Nations has two global forces and four other teams. And the global forces obviously are France and Ireland. And I don't care if they got knocked out in the quarterfinal. If they'd have played the next day, they might have beaten South Africa and New Zealand. One of them could be world champions. The last 2 years, it's no coincidence. 2 years ago, France won the Grand Slam when they played Ireland at home. Last year, Ireland won the Grand Slam when they played France at home. I think the geographical location is the determining factor. Marseille, in many ways, is going to be harder than Paris because it's a very, very hostile, atmospheric stadium. Antoine Dupont isn't there, but believe me, Jalibert is playing beautifully. Luku is club scrum half, so that takes a little bit out of the pain of Dupont. And in Nolan Le Garrec, they've got a wonder boy, 21-year-old who could start as a wonderful player. Ireland have lost Sexton. I'm a massive fan of Jack Crowley, but Marseille away is a tough place to say, go and dominate this game. So I think it'll be quite close, but I would have France crossing the line. And if they win that one, they become odds-on favourites for the Grand Slam immediately.
One factor in this, which we don't know and we won't know until that day, is the World Cup hangover. That either they'll both teams have a lot of reason to want to get straight back up and prove themselves. But you don't know, do you? You don't know what the impact of playing that sort of rugby was, then starting the domestic season. We won't know till we see that.
No, we won't. I mean, this is one of those things. It's so psychological, isn't it? France poured so much emotion into that World Cup, and I thought they did have a great chance of winning it. They lost 29-28 to South Africa. I'm sort of banking on the fact that enough time has now passed. There's enough, to use the old cliche, water under the bridge for them to get their act together. And I think that Marseille will work really well because it'll take the misery of the Paris memory away, takes the French national team to somewhere else. So I'm just banking on them. You're right, Stig. You don't know. I just get the feeling they're a very professional outfit, and I think they can bounce back. And in a weird way, Dupont saying, I want to have a crack at global glory sevens, that might help France because it'll really focus them even more, the players that are still there. It's possible that there is going to be a psychological kickback for France or Ireland. But I think both these teams are pretty professional. I don't think it'll happen in either case.
Did you ever, when you were playing, Stuart, did you ever show up at a training and then to a game and you can't put your finger on it, because you know your players, they're a good team. Did you ever feel like, oh, we're not there today, we're not at the races? Did that ever happen to you, and where you can't really explain it, just you've showed up and you don't show up?
Yeah, it does happen. It does happen. Um, and but sometimes it happens on the flip side. And had France or Ireland won the World Cup,
Yeah,
it's quite possible they'd have turned up there and they would be half the odds they are to win the Grand Slam because they're the world champions, and they might not have that killer edge. That's what I found, especially in a Bath team that for a decade won a lot. For example, when you get to pre-season training after a double, you just didn't have that edge, and it was
yeah,
really hard to get there. And obviously, I'm not comparing a World Cup with a domestic English League Cup, but what I am comparing is the psychology of the game. That when you have achieved something that makes you very proud, and takes some doing, then there is a danger that you turn up for the next time and you're not quite right. Now, in a club team, after a domestic season that's great, it could be your first training session. For Ireland and France, after a World Cup, had one of them won that,
yeah.
then I think France would more likely be off the pace had they won the World Cup than
Yeah.
had they lost it.
Funny enough, I mean, this takes us off topic, but it's why Michael Jordan, I think, is the greatest team sportsman ever, in the way that he took the Chicago Bulls and they won in '91, then they won in '92, then they won in '93, and then he goes off for his baseball sojourn, comes back, and they win in '96, '97, and '98. So three on 6 occasions, but on 4 occasions they were repeating. And to do that when everyone wants a bit more glory, everyone wants a bit more of the ball, everyone thinks that they're the greatest, to be able to come back and keep being brilliant, that's probably the ultimate level of sport in the end, isn't it?
Yes, it certainly is. I mean, I don't know a lot about basketball, but I do know that at that level of sport, keeping winning is so hard. I was chatting to Ronan O'Gara a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking about La Rochelle because they've won the last two European Cups, and I was saying, have you got a psychological? Is there a psychological problem? And he said, yeah, but it's not the one you're thinking of. He said, we want to go for a third time, and he said we're not struggling because we're sated with success. We're struggling because every time we play now, we're the dual European champions,
Yeah.
and everybody wants a bit of us. He said, you play European rugby, and there's only 3 or 4 teams know really that they can win it. And he said, top 14, there's only 4 or 5 teams can win that. But when they play us, that's the big one, and it gets harder and harder. So with the Chicago Bulls, every time they keep winning a title, they become an even bigger name and a bigger opportunity for
Yeah.
a team who can't win a title to have their moment of glory and knock them off the peak. So, like I say, that's why that's a theory to say France and Ireland will be more dangerous than some people who are saying they're going to be hurting so much that they'll struggle.
I want to talk about that club game in Europe, because I've watched quite a lot of European rugby,
Mm.
the championship this year, and I'm just so struck about the difference between my beloved Leicester played Leinster, and it was
Mm.
Leicester playing Ireland, or somewhere between Ireland and Ireland A, and it was. It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. It was. They played quite well. Leicester. They got turned over at home, but they didn't play badly. But it was like them playing a large chunk of the Irish team, and the health of the domestic game and how that relates to the health of the national team, I think is
Mm.
becoming more and more of a pressing issue in rugby. Do you agree with that? I mean, maybe we talk about that when we talk about England, but that feels to be like a relationship that's just there and very present.
There's no doubt at all. It's been a massive assistance to Ireland and to Andy Farrell being able to take a core of players who play together week in and week out, and are some of the best players in Europe. But I think that's just the advantage of the professional system in Ireland. They don't come from a culture where club rugby was strong. Therefore, when the game went professional, they went to the regional situation. In England and France, to even greater extent, club rugby was strong. Therefore, the whole concept of south and west, Midlands and north didn't function
I
because
remember
there
going
was
to the games, Stuart. I remember going to watch those games with the Midlands in their blue kit versus
no,
the North in the red. I remember that as a kid, but it wasn't a thing, was it? It was like, well, where's the
no,
proper rugby?
not at all. I mean, I was captain of the South and Southwest. We played a game at Gloucester, and we ran out, and we hadn't picked a couple of Gloucester players who they thought should have been in, so they booed us from start to finish. That's how it is. But Ireland, they were able to shift from small clubs to a world where suddenly 7 or 8 clubs became a monster team. That every now and again, when they played the All Blacks, they could be really good, but they didn't
Yeah.
play that much. Then they were playing all the time, and Munster strode to the top of Europe, and then Leinster came, and Ireland have gone with it. And I think there's no doubt at all that is a massive advantage for them. But France have been able to counter that with a club system. So I would say I don't think it's a sort of end game for the English. I think we've got to get our club system better. And I'm watching the way Northampton play and Harlequins and Bath at times, and how Leicester can play and Saracens. And I don't see it as a long term problem. I still my take on this is that our overriding problem is the conservatism and the culture of the game in England rather than the teams who are playing it.
Okay.
I think if you look at French teams and you look at Irish teams, they play with a blend and a balance. And
Well,
yes,
let's
they
get that
make,
to we'll get that to England, but I don't think, Stuart, you can prove if I'm wrong. Excuse me. We've had France, then Ireland. I don't think your third team is going to be England. Is that right? Who's next? Do you think in order? I mean, it might be England. If it's England, we'll talk about England, but you tell me what it is.
it's tight. I just England do have a potentially a powerful pack, and they just showed that against South Africa in the semi-finals. And third place to me is going to it's there's a third place. It's England beat Argentina in the World Cup in the bronze medal playoff. I think the Calcutta Cup match is the bronze medal playoff,
I think that's right.
and on the face of it, Scotland have got a cracking back row. Their back line is excellent. They've got strength in depth, and they've got Murrayfield, and they've beaten England the last 3 times. So if I was a bookmaker, I would have to make Scotland favourites. But England do have that capacity, if they get their head together, of depriving them of ball and forcing Finn Russell to play on the back foot. And if you get him on the back foot, then Sione, Tui Pelotu, and Hugh Jones aren't as dangerous in tandem. So I think England have got a chance there, but one has to say that's based on a hunch that England are going to add something extra to their game and not just the forwards. And at the moment, I'd rather go on the evidence of what I've seen than what I'm guessing. The
But I
flip
guess
side,
that
sorry, the flip side is you've got to remember Scotland, when they took on the big guns in the World Cup, they were comfortably beaten by the Box, and they were laid waste to by Ireland for 40 minutes. So, on paper it's Scotland, but there's question marks there. So I think that's a very tight game, and I do think that how many times can Scotland keep beating England? So all form says it's Scotland, but I'd be really 50-50 on that one.
and also maybe the lesson of the World Cup was England can show up in big matches and they can live with the big boys. I mean, they should have beaten South Africa, who are world champions. Scotland have not really done that in a long time. And Borthwick, obviously former Leicester coach, I've seen his work a long time. You have as well. It's boring, but he does have the ability with Sinfield to get a good defensive line working. He's got a big pack. The kick and pressure game can work. Who knows what the weather will be like in any of these games as well. There's definitely a version of England which they proved in the World Cup that when the going did get tough, they didn't crumble. they probably played up to their potential in the World Cup by taking South Africa close in the semi-final. So they'll probably go into this camp fairly confident on the back of that, I'd have thought.
Well, it will, yeah. I would say you can't take away the fact the conditions were so catastrophically bad for rugby in that semi-final.
Yeah.
I was just saying to someone on the Times desk, I've been playing or reporting, writing about rugby for 50 years, and that was one of the 5 worst days for a game of rugby. And I have no doubt at all, had it been normal conditions, South Africa were 15, 20 points. So this thing about England rising for the world champions, yes, they did. That's the hard fact of it. But I will go to my grave saying, had it been a dry day, that would not have been a 16-15 scoreline. So I still think England aren't maybe quite as good as some of the apologists of the Borthwick style would like you to believe. And so that is a concern. And the other concern, of course, is England are going to have to dominate Scotland, because until they start playing with balance, the only way they can beat a decent team, and Scotland are a decent team, is by destroying them up front. And you can't take that as a given. So what England have got to do, they've got Felix Jones now running defence, and I think he'll be very important in transition, and you get this South African ability to turn defence into attack. So he's extremely important. But the key is, can England find a little bit of variety? And I think if they can, then they can end this 3-match losing run against Scotland, even at Murrayfield, because there are question marks about Scotland too.
Does that mean Finn Smith, in your view, at 10?
Yeah, I mean, I was cheating the last week or so. People were saying who's got to start, and I'm saying, well, it's got to be Smith to start and Smith to finish, and I just refused to give a first name. And now, unfortunately, Marcus Smith has got injured in Girona. I want Finn Smith to play because I feel that George Ford is too close to the Borthwick template. George is a brilliant rugby player. But I think at the moment he has been captured by the conservatism of the territorial kick and chase pressure game. And I would like to see something fresh. And I think Finn Smith, he can kick, he can run, he can pass. When I ask for balance, what I'm asking from a 9, 10 and 12 is a capacity to look up and see what's on, not do what you've agreed on a Friday in a team meeting. And at the moment, and if you watch George play for Sale, he's playing a very similar type of rugby. So I think Finn Smith has all the form. It is the start of a cycle, because as much as people say every game is as important as the next, the most important game for Steve Borthwick in the next 4 years will be the World Cup final, if he can get England there. Yeah. And to do that, sometimes you have to say, well, my instinct says let's start with George Ford. I'm comfortable. We're more likely to win because we'll play 10-man rugby, and that, I think, is the way. At some stage, you've got to start saying, let's look to the future. And I think Finn Smith has done enough in Northampton to say he is clearly ahead of George Ford on form, and he has the capacity to play a kick, run, or pass game. So he'd definitely be my man, and as long as Alex Mitchell's fit, and I would also have Fraser Dingwall at 12. So you're talking about a 9, 10, 12 Northampton, which gives Borthwick an easy opportunity for England to find a little bit of expansion, especially with probably Tommy Freeman roaming in off the wing.
And that could be exciting if they manage to pull it off. Let's talk about Wales. Wales number, where are we now? 5. Wales will be 5th in this thing. So you'll go England maybe 3, Scotland maybe 4, or reversed. Wales at number 5. This was the year that JPR Williams died. And I was telling people on my radio show, we were talking about him, what a figure he was. And I had a video, a VHS, that's how old I am, Stuart, a VHS called The Crowning Glory. And it was Wales winning the Triple Crown in the 70s. And it was a video of the best games, or the best highlights, I think, probably. It wasn't even full games then. And it was that team of JPR Williams and JJ Williams,
Gerald,
Gerald Williams, and there was Barry
Benny and
John.
Gareth. Well, I
Yeah,
think 70s. Phil Bennett was taking over by then.
yeah,
I was a schoolboy playing rugby in Wales, and I going to those internationals is still it influenced how I thought rugby should be played, and I still have a vision. And I understand that defensive coaches have changed all of that, but there was something magical there. This was sex and drugs and rock and roll without the drugs.
well, and,
Maybe with
and,
the sex as well,
and,
but
yeah, I know exactly what you mean. So, how far are Wales from that is the question I suppose I'm getting to.
they're a long way. But in the same way that England, Scotland 3-4, Wales have a chance against Scotland this weekend. On paper, I don't like the look of Wales. It's a country where rugby is struggling a little bit at the moment, but you don't write off Gatland as a Six Nations operator. Um, they won't be playing pretty rugby. They didn't play pretty rugby in the World Cup, but they were quite effective, and I don't think many people thought they would get as far as they did.
That's right.
They've lost Jack Morgan, which I think is a big blow because I think Warren had rightly decided to get into this new cycle earlier. Unlike Steve Borthwick, who I felt treated the World Cup as something England could win when they couldn't, Gatland almost said, let's go, do what we can, and get ahead of the game, move into the next World Cup, a bit like France in 2019. And it went quite well, but Morgan was very influential, and he was a new generational captain. And now with him injured and the old generation general Dan Biggar missing, you just wonder in between 6 and 10, can Thomas Williams at scrum half really hold that all together? It's a question, but you don't say Scotland are playing in Cardiff, they'll definitely win that,
Yeah.
even with a very good backline. Wales have got the capacity to shock people, but I think that Louis Rees-Zammit, his
Yeah.
decision to step away, again, it makes you
Amazing.
just think things aren't going right at the moment. So
But that's true of England as well. I think I'm so glad you mentioned him because he's gone off to the NFL where,
yeah,
let's be honest, the chance of him succeeding is minimal. So
yes.
minimal chance of success there.
Mm.
But you look at Owen Farrell going to France, Henry Arundel's gone to France. It's the same thing. It seems to me both in Wales and England, there is not sufficient attraction in the domestic game to keep all the stars there. And that's a worry, isn't it? Because there's more money in France. There's more money in the NFL. There's more glamour. There's more success. There's probably better rugby. There's probably a better lifestyle that goes with it. Certainly French rugby, you would imagine. That's becoming a problem for those two nations, isn't it? Wales and England. That if you're a brilliant, exciting player, as you were, Stuart, would you want to go and play in France for 2 years, even if you were 27 and that meant not playing for England?
Yeah. I mean, I turned England down a couple of times just to go back to Bath because you're so fed up with the style.
Yeah.
And you're quite right. The mood music's not good, but I think part of this, and this is one of the reasons I'll keep coming back to the fact, it's not enough to just say we'll play 10-man rugby and we'll win the next game. I'm pretty certain that Henry Arundel thought, sod this, and not just because he didn't get a pass and he didn't get much of a sniff despite scoring 5 tries. Just thinking, do I want to play this way? I think Owen Farrell is different. I think Farrell has been a battler. I don't think he's technically the greatest fly half ever, but I think he's seen an opportunity to play under less pressure, to earn good money, and to do a Johnny Wilkinson. And good luck to the bloke. He's earned that because of his commitment. But Louis Rees-Zammit tells me that he's thinking, geez, do I want to just chase kicks for Wales? Because he's not getting ball. They're not playing lovely rugby. I don't think, for example, Damien Penaud or Will Jordan of New Zealand would be saying we're off to pursue an NFL dream. They want to play for France and New Zealand because they're getting loads of ball. I don't think Tommy Freeman would be thinking, I'm going to be a wide receiver. I get hundreds of touches for Northampton. So I think it's very important that England are playing with a style that kids coming through from the age of 12 all the way through to academy players and people starting to play for the first team are saying, yeah, you know what? I can play a brand of rugby that can get me in the England team, that can get me some fame, some money, and most importantly, an opportunity to play the sport I love at the highest level, and not just the highest level in that it's an international, but at a level where it's really exhilarating, where Twickenham is off its feet.
Would you, if you were the RFU, though, say if you want to go and play in France, which is a different culture, it's often a superior brand of rugby, or it can be a superior brand of rugby, you can still play for England. I understand why they've defensively said no, because it to stop people leaving, but it's not stopping people leaving. And in football, you wouldn't have that. You know, someone who plays brilliantly, as we see, people play brilliantly across Europe still get to play for England football. Would you change the rule?
I'm just waiting for the first player to challenge the RFU in court, because I see no possible way that legally you can stop someone playing for England. I don't see that. I would change the rule, but I think what you've got to remember where this comes from. This was the RFU wanted more time with their players. They weren't getting it with the clubs, but the clubs knew there was pressure from France because of the extra amount of euro on the table. Yeah. So the clubs said, we'll give you the players for the extra time you want, but you got to help us and say, if you go to France, you can't play for England. And I think that happened a long time ago, and people have forgotten that now. But that is the deal. Now, I think the deal is dead in the water for all sorts of reasons now. And I think we're seeing young English players coming through, and I think there are opportunities for them to come through and play extremely well. And I think a lot of the big guns who go to France, Owen Farrell not playing for England, fine. I don't think I wouldn't have picked Owen Farrell, because I think that they want to be fresh. They want to move on. As Courtney Laws said on his very interesting and nuanced piece yesterday in the Times, Owen is a very good captain of an experienced team, but maybe when you get younger players coming through, it can be quite intimidating. That's certainly how I read it, and I think that Owen going to Racing is great for Owen. It gives him a chance to relax, to let his hair down, and to see if he can be the players that I know a lot of my colleagues think he is, and I'm not so certain. But let's see if he can do that. But also then it'll give England a chance to have another sort of lead, another sort of feel. You do sense that inspiring as competitive as Owen Farrell must clearly be, from everything we know about what they say in Saracens and England. If you get into the England situation there, I can't believe there isn't a degree of intimidation for younger players. I can't believe that. And I don't think Owen Farrell would deliberately do that. I just think that's who he is.
That's what Leicester used to be like. That was famously, there were Leicester teams that had that, where if you were, the great Johnson teams, there was a real, if you were a young player, you were expected to shut up, sit in the corner, while the veterans kind of ran the team. And I'm sure that could, these days, that feels less likely to happen, doesn't it? Because people, when they're 21, they want to express themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. But the other thing is, Johnson, and before him, Dean Richards, these were strong characters, but they were also people who understood, I think Leicester, a very maligned team when Richards was coach and Johnson was captain. They got this reputation of being 10-man team, but Pat Howard was brilliant. Austin Healey was fantastic. Leicester played some lovely rugby, but because the essence of their game was forward, they are now remembered as a pack and not much else. And it's absolute nonsense. It's untrue. But Martin Johnson, gnarly old soul that he was, he wouldn't say to Austin Healey, you just kick it. He would allow Healey and Pat Howard to see what's on and make the decision. And it gets back to what I'm saying, Stig. I feel that someone like Henry Arundel goes to England and he's told, wear those.
Yeah,
It's like
exactly right.
it's like the 320 at Cheltenham. Put some blinkers on and don't look. It'll make
Yeah.
you better, but it doesn't make you better.
We better go, Stuart, 'cause we could do this for forever. Do you want to do 60 seconds on Italy?
Yeah, of course I do.
Go on.
Italy tried to play too much rugby in the World Cup. They were right to do it. They had no chance beating beating France and New Zealand by playing territorial rugby. They went over the top. I think if Italy play like England did in the World Cup, they'll be a lot better than they were in the World Cup. And if England play like Italy did, with a little bit more attack from depth, then England will certainly not have the crowd booing them. So Italy v England is certainly not the biggest game of weekend one, but it's the most interesting. Italy are going to play like 2023 England, and England, we hope, are going to play a little bit like Italy did in the Six Nations and wanted to play against the All Blacks.
Let's see if you're right, Stuart. That's a fine prediction to leave it on. Great to speak to you as ever, Stuart. We'll do it again next week when we see what happens on week one.
Pleasure.
That's Stuart Barnes there, and you can read him. I mean, he's, as he said, he's been writing about or playing or commenting on rugby for 50 years. You get the benefit of his wisdom in the Times. That's the best place to read about rugby in the Times as we run up to the Six Nations. We'll be back covering it over the course of the next few weeks. And if you like listen to radio, you can listen to me and Asma Mir at 6 o'clock every morning, Monday to Thursday on Times Radio. Thank you for joining us.